Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. And thank you for being here. My name is Gina Moore. I'm a journalist and the editor-in-chief of Guernica magazine. And as a journalist, a real appreciator of the topic we're going to discuss here today in this UNFPA webinar on behavioral science to promote gender equality through strengthened marriage registration. And it's delightful to see so many of you joining us. Thanks at the outset to the speakers who've made the time to be here, to the attendees for sharing your time, and certainly I know your questions when we have time for that at the end. And we will dive right into it. We're going to talk today about civil registration and vital statistics as a systems level tool for promoting women and girls' empowerment, especially the protection of their rights within marital unions around the world. CRVS, Civil Registration and Vital Statistics, is a great tool for diagnosing the challenges and gaps and for providing a basis for women and girls to learn about and act on their entitlements and their rights. We're looking at two kind of overlooked or sometimes neglected areas of this conversation today. One of those is marriage registration, which in particular is a neglected component of civil registration systems very often around the world. And yet marriage registration is critical for gender equality and for women's empowerment. The other of these is, of course, behavioral science, which is part of the focus of this week of UN Behavioral Sciences Week, which we find ourselves right in the middle of. And behavioral science is a bit of an underutilized diagnostic tool at the moment that can better serve CRVS systems to make them not only people-centric, but also gender transformative. Of course, to affect that kind of change, both in our individual contexts and at a global level, we need to be working with the right collaborators, the right institutions, asking the right questions. And behavioral science's insights can help us do that with different stakeholders. So this is all part of what we're going to explore today with some really grounded insight, data, and analysis from around the world, thanks to our panelists. I'll introduce them as we go through the lineup so that we have as much time as possible to hear from them. I'll remind you that there's an interpretation button on the bottom right hand of your screen for interpretation from English into French, Spanish, and Arabic. And I'll say once again, thank you for being here, for joining us, and thank you again to the panelists. The first person that we're going to hear from today is Rachana Sunar with the Sambad Community Project in Nepal. So I'll turn it right over to you, Rachana. Thank you so much. Oh, Rachana, you're muted. If you could unmute yourself.
Hello?
Now we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good evening, dear colleagues and honorable guests. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you about child marriage and marriage registration and women's and girls' empowerment in Nepal. My name is Rachana Sunar. I live in Surkhet, a district of Karnali province in Nepal. A beautiful home, lots of challenges and opportunities within. So I belong to the Dalit community, which is classified as the lowest caste or so-called untouchable caste system of Nepal. Although the caste discrimination in Nepal is illegal since 1962, Dalit communities are often the most marginalized and have the high number of child marriage practices in Nepal. When I was 15 years old, my family decided to marry me off, but I wasn't ready to give up on my dream of education. And I did not want to get married against of my will. So I fought for my freedom and completed my education, finishing schools and obtaining a degree at a local university. These experiences actually set me on a path to advocate against child marriage to help other girls like me in my community. I started my dialogue journey through the Sambad Center since 2013, which was supported by Stroma Foundations and going door to door, having dialogues with parents, community members, religious leaders to convince them to end these harmful practices of child marriage. We as a team, we were able to stop more than 80 child marriages, and we were able to visit schools to school to convince young girls and boys to say no to child marriage. So those girls who we have saved them from being forced child bride, today they are going to higher educations, having good jobs, and they are living their fullest life independently with full of dreams, freedom, and dignity. Through our organization, we also have a school where we provide free sponsorship, free space for marginalized children, especially children of those forced child brides, aiming when we are raising those 150 children, we are giving this free time to young mothers to go back to school or to learn life skills, have jobs, and live independently.
I think we might be having a connectivity issue here. I think we have momentarily lost Rachana. Hopefully we will be able to get her back. And yeah, indeed, we've lost her for the moment, but we know she's there. I'm sure the connection will restore itself. In the meantime, we might also then be able to hear from Dorina and Andreev Gitaru, who brings us some wonderful perspective from the regional office of South Asia, where she is the chief. And Dorina, we might go ahead with your presentation if that's all right. And please do, flow all the way through. We'll patch Rachana back in when we are able to. And Dorina, we're really looking forward to hearing about the research and data you've been able to ground all this in. So thank you for joining us.
Hello, hi colleagues. Good evening for those who are in this part of the world. I'm in South Asia, also in Nepal. Strangely, I'm Kathmandu, covering the 8 countries here in South Asia, quite difficult countries, some of them. I'm happy to be in this event, and first of all, because behavioral science is something we need to look into when we create services. Because for a very long time, we have been creating a lot of services. Like we have a myriad of different services and service providers, the governments, NGOs, and so on. But we have an issue which is somehow overlooked, which is not really asking people what kind of services they need, how they need these services to be, to operate, and so on. So my presentation will be very, very short. I have only 5 minutes. So I have a longer PowerPoint, which you'll get later. And you'll find a lot of other interesting information in there. But just going quickly through my presentation here, how do we, first of all, why marriage registration is somehow connected with gender disparities. And I think that first of all, because high quality data from civil registration systems is crucial for women to identify, first of all, and address inequities, preventing women and girls from accessing different services and benefiting from civil rights. In the same time, inefficient CRVS systems deprive many women of their civil and political rights. And we saw that in many countries around the world, because civil registration systems do not operate efficiently. Many women cannot register birth, marriage, divorce, or the death of their husbands, for example, or children. And without this validation, they are unable to provide the proof the government needs to establish their identity, age, marital status, so they are not eligible for civil and political rights. There is also an issue linked to inherited traditions and perceptions affecting families' decision-making, including the access of women to civil registration. And in some patriarchal societies, men have traditionally been responsible for communicating with authorities, ensuring legal and official proceedings, preserving the documentation for all family members. And this is perceived like a means of control in a family. So although women are not legally prohibited from registering vital events, this traditional perception robs women of the power to do so. And in the same time, women face major logistical and cultural obstacles to register vital events. For example, they cannot get out of the house or the neighborhood without the husband's permission or consent. In some other countries, they cannot even get outside the house without being accompanied by a mahram or like the male representative of their families. So just to clarify a bit, that services and behavioral drivers are connected. And if you saw the previous slide, like the general impression about the civil registration and deprivation of different rights of women, we can look also into the perception of regarding civil registration among the community members, especially men. And in many societies, unfortunately, men initiate marriage registration. And many men tend to resist official marriage registration as it is perceived as giving too many rights to the woman. Men also fear that registration will make the wife more confident about her position in the family and in her marriage. And during many qualitative researches conducted in several countries around the world, some men were saying that this will make the wife too sure her husband will not leave her and she will not make additional efforts to please her husband. Men also resist marriage registration because they fear their wife will inherit their assets in the event of a separation. And also an official certificate represents a commitment between the husband and the wife. And in many societies, it might be perceived as impossible for the man afterwards to have relationships with other women. So all of this, the whole package put together, shows us an interesting issue. We put in place the services, but there are so many drivers around those services and around the behaviors leading people to access the services. Then before putting even in place the services or making sure that people access them, we need first of all to understand why they don't or why would they access these services. I think that's an interesting saying which we need to look into, is that virtually impossible to get people to change behavior just by giving them information. And that's something which behavioral science shows us during many researches conducted around the world. Information doesn't change behavior. Information only gives an idea to people where to go, what to do, but not necessarily an incentive for them to access some services or adopt some behaviors.
I'm so sorry. I'm just going to jump in and ask you if you can maybe wrap up for us in the next 30 seconds.
Yes, of course. I'm just about to. We have the behavioral drivers model, which is a great tool, and I won't go. I put it in here for you maybe to use at a later stage if you are interested. But what drives a behavior? You can see a long list of different drivers. And what can we do to address those drivers? Again, a long list of potential activities which could be implemented. And of course, there are a lot of local platforms which could be used to make sure that we convene the proper information to proper people, and we also use them for demand creation and for community engagement. That's all from my side, a very, very short presentation. Hopefully, I will have some questions and I will be able to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorina. That was a really concrete and visual way of pointing us to, I think, an irony that we're contending with, right? That you brought out there, which is behavioral norms are sometimes in the way of collecting the data that we need, the information that we need, that can especially cut women off from exercising their agency or empowerment. And yet data and information by themselves will not lead people to change behaviors. So hopefully we'll have time to unpack that a little bit in the Q&A. I believe Rachana Sunar has been able to rejoin us. And so we might tip back to her, Rachana, if you're there and ready to pick up, with apologies for the interruption in the flow of your very needed comments, but we're looking forward to hearing more from you. Oh, no, I've just got a message that it seems Rachana has disconnected again. Okay, well, we're gonna, third time's the charm, they say, where I come from. And so we're going to wait for that third time and hope that the charm does hold. But in the meantime, we'll move along and hear from Ramesh Silva, who's a technical lead with UNFPA and is going to talk with us a bit about the social and behavioral determinants of under-registration in a host of different contexts. And so Ramesh, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. I'll just fire up my presentation. 1 second. Let me know if it's on full screen. Is it okay?
Yep, I've got you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So let's just jump straight into it, since Gina and Dorina have really framed things quite nicely, as well as Rachana. What I'm going to do is share some findings from a multi-country research by UNFPA and the Center of Excellence for CRVS Systems in Benin, Burkina Faso, Republic of Congo, Jordan, and Senegal. But I want to frame this a little bit, by building on some of Dorina's comments and the work here around civil registration and vital statistics by UNFPA, is really taking a life course approach from birth to death, including everything in between, including marriage and divorce registration. And these are really, really important tools to promote human rights, advance sustainable development, and achieve gender equality. Sdg Goal Targets 16.9 and 17.19 explicitly recognize the contribution of civil registration and universal legal identity to sustainable development. And the monitoring of 67 SDG indicators rely heavily on civil registration data. The importance of birth and death registration is widely known, but marriage and divorce registration are crucial in ensuring gender equality within a marital union and supporting parental rights and inheritance entitlements in the event of divorce or spousal death. Yet marriage registration is oft neglected. In the 2010 census round, only 6 countries worldwide assessed the completeness of marriage registration. What we see here is notable variation in the completeness of marriage registration, both between and within countries. The vertical colored dotted lines here depict the overall national average of marriages that are officially registered in these countries, varying from 95 and 92% in Armenia and Kyrgyzstan on average, to about 60%, for example, in Brazil. If we focus on the purple dots for Brazil, we also see subnationally across the different subnational regions of Brazil, wide discrepancies, wide disparities here, where marriage registration in some parts of the country is only about 30% of all marriages being registered, whereas in others, it's more towards around 73, 74%. The critical question that we've been working on is trying to understand, why are some marriages registered and others not? So the Center of Excellence for Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Systems, which has been hosted at UNFPA headquarters since August 2021, has developed a socio-ecological model of the proximate determinants of marriage under registration. It unpacks the structural factors that lead to non-registration of marriage at the individual, family, and household level, and also at broader societal levels. To operationalize this framework, UNFPA conducted a program of behavioral science research in Benin, Burkina Faso, Republic of Congo, Senegal, and Jordan that drew heavily on focus group discussions and in-depth interviews with a wide range of stakeholders. This work is innovative as it builds on years of behavioral science research on birth registration and extends these tools to the oft-neglected area of marriage registration. Conceptually, each and every marriage registration involves three critical behavioral phases. One, the decision of whether to officially register the marriage. Two, the act of identifying how to officially register the marriage. And three, the process of navigating the official procedural requirements associated with marriage registration and certification. What UNFPA's behavioral science research has found was that there were multiple behavioral factors affecting the propensity for a marriage to be registered in these areas of West Africa and also Jordan. These factors can be broken down into three broad types: socioeconomic and cultural factors, issues around the perception and actuality of access to government, and thirdly, the user-friendliness of civil registration services. So let's go into these in a little bit more detail. In all four West African countries, the prime importance of religious, ritual, and community recognition was highlighted over and above the official registration of the marriage by civil registration authorities. In Senegal, an older male remarked, "It's not in our culture to declare marriage. The majority of weddings are traditional weddings in the community. The marriage at the town hall is too Western." Another key socio-cultural factor uncovered in our field research is associated with gender norms and patriarchal inheritance and gender equality within the marriage. Issues that smack to the basic question of who has the right to register a marriage. An older man in Burkina Faso remarked, "If you marry at the town hall, all your property belongs to your wife in the event of your death. Your family will have nothing. That's what scares people." In Benin, several female participants regarded marriage registration as only important for civil servants and their dependents, given their public pension entitlements. So official marriage registration was regarded as largely irrelevant amongst most community members. And secondarily, we uncovered these factors around access to government and user-friendly services. Issues of access to local government services were regarded as a secondary behavioral determinant, as mentioned by this older gentleman in Nuna, in the rural area of Nuna in Burkina Faso, where he highlighted that marriage rituals at the local church were much more convenient and probably more important than those through the official civil registration system. Further, the low user-friendliness of marriage registration services was also cited as a secondary disincentive when deciding to register a marriage or actually trying to navigate the official administrative procedures. Our field research in Burkina Faso and Senegal also highlighted the different sequencing of marriage rituals within these two countries. So on the left-hand side, for Muslims in Senegal and Muslims and Catholics in Burkina Faso, the religious and customary celebration always precedes the official civil registration process. Whereas on the right-hand side, for Christians in Senegal and Protestants in Burkina Faso, the civil marriage precedes a religious celebration. And in fact, an official marriage registration, a marriage certificate is required by most religious leaders there. This is consistent with this sequencing is really associated with official marriage registration amongst Christians in Senegal being more than twice as high as marriage registration rates for Muslims in Senegal. So here, you know, the connections to ritual and community norms and partnership are critical. So let me conclude by highlighting the key insights here, which some of this very early behavioral science research has been highlighting for UNFPA and our partners. First of all, as we've known, marriage registration is an important tool to advance gender equality and women's empowerment, yet major structural impediments remain in terms of advancing towards universal marriage registration. Behavioral science is helping us to unpack both the nature of these impediments and really understand the supply side and the demand side factors associated with the non or late registration of marriage. And further, they're helping us to assess some of the structural factors which need addressing. Thanks so much, Jenna. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. That's fascinating. And a multi-country look at the problem is such a rich place to begin to understand what we know, what we don't yet know, the kinds of questions we can be asking about the interrelationship between cultural, national, religious norms and behaviors that are impacting these registrations in the way that you've described. So it's such a rich and textured sense of the field that we're looking around at together. And we're back with the third time, I believe, with Rachana Sunar. We feel good about the connection. So indeed, I think we have that charm. And Rachana, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you now that we have even some context of the data problem in our minds, what the stakes really are for women and girls on the ground of the kind of issues that our experts have been identifying. So thank you so much for picking back up with us. If you might unmute yourself, Rachana.
Thank you so much, Gina, for giving me this third time trial. And I really apologize for my bad connection here. So shall I go through my speech or just answer to your question?
I think we'd love to hear the comments that you prepared. Yeah, so please do, if you're comfortable, pick up right there. That'd be great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And good afternoon and good morning, good evening to all vulnerable guests and colleagues around the world. And thank you so much for having me to this event. And I am so pleased to talk about child marriage issues in Nepal. I am Rachana Sunar. I live in Surkhet, a district of Karnali province, and I belong to Dalit communities, which is classified as the lowest caste of so-called untouchable caste system of Nepal. Although caste discrimination in Nepal is illegal since 1962, Dalit communities are often the most marginalized and have the high number of child marriage practices in Nepal. Therefore, I was 15 years old, my family wanted me to marry off, but I was not ready to give up my dream of education, and I did not want to get married against of my will. So I fought for my freedom and I completed my education, finishing schools and obtaining a degree at a local university. The experiences set me on a path to advocate for other girls in my community against child marriage. I started my dialogue journey through Sambat Center, which literally means the dialogue, and dialogue is breaking the silence. So we started from 2013, which was supported by Stroma Foundation, going door to door, having dialogues with parents, community members, religious leaders to convince them to end this harmful practice of child marriage. And we as a team from Sambat, we reached local schools, meeting young boys and girls to say no for child marriage. Throughout the campaign, we were able to stop more than 80 child marriages and send girls back to the school. Today, those girls who were saved from being forced bride, they are going to higher school, having good jobs and living their fullest life independently with full of dreams, freedom, and dignity. Through our organization, we also have a school, a free space, and we provide full sponsorship for marginalized children, especially those children from forced child bride. Today, we are raising 150 children at school while taking care of their children. We support young mothers to go back to school, learn life skills, and live their life independently. The current law states the minimum age of marriage at 20 for both men and women in Nepal. Child marriage is illegal in Nepal, and it has its numerous adverse effects on the overall well-being of children who are mentally, psychologically, physically, emotionally unfit for married life. For example, married girls will drop out from school, and it carries the risk of premature pregnancy, malnutrition in children, psychosocial reproductive health threats, uterus prolapse, mental distress, and it continues to the cycle of domestic violence, poverty, risk of second marriage and divorce, which leads them to depression and suicide sometimes, which is so sad. But then why is child marriage still happening in our society? Well, the majority of the population in Nepal live in rural areas. Nepal is the country of villages where high number of people are illiterate, live under the poverty line. They are unaware of the laws and they blindly follow harmful practices such as child marriages. This practice is culturally and socially accepted, and it is seen as no big deal, though it has many disadvantaging impacts on the girl's life and boy's life also. In rural area, the child marriage is taken as adding the extra member in the family, taking care of the house, looking after animals, taking care of the old parents, and doing all the house chores. Therefore, both families morally support and sometimes they hide the child marriage from the government, believing this will set their children to the right path and they will be responsible and settle down in early age so they can fulfill the financial needs of the family and they can run the family ahead. Moreover, COVID-19 has made a huge impact in the status of child marriage. When the whole world was struggling with COVID pandemic, students were isolated at home, out of school reach. Most of the children have experienced domestic violence, sexual harassment, financial crisis at home. So they found child marriage is the only one solution to run away. And secondly, door-to-door campaigns, joint forces from all the stakeholders against child marriage sort of restricted. So that also caused the child marriage is raising higher than before. There is no enforcement mechanism to stop child marriage in local government other than having constitutional laws prohibiting child marriage before the age of 20 years old. However, a study published in 2019 details efforts by the Nepal government to improve their efforts to reduce child marriage, but survey data for more rural districts shows that 37% of the girls marry before they turn 18 years old, and 10% even before they turn 15. So the legal framework shows us that child marriage is illegal in Nepal, which makes registration of early marriage in Nepal is impossible. To register a marriage, the couple must meet the age requirement of 20. So the child marriage cannot be registered till the couple reaches 20 years old. This also impacts on the birth registration of children. A birth cannot be registered if the parents have not the marriage registration. And often these issues only arises when a child is ready to go to school and they need birth registration documents to submit to the school. And sometimes grandparents will register the child's birth as if they are the parents for school registration. Civil registration and vital statistics provide tools for policymakers to understand the situation on the ground. At the same time, marriage registration is critical for empowering women to be able to establish their social, economic, educational, and political status in the society. They can seek legal support in the time of need if they have their legal identity. And I am witness of a child bride who is still struggling to have her marriage registration and take the legal action for her and for her children's identity. She was married at 15. Their marriage could not be registered due to the early age, so they waited for a few years after having children. She faced violence and domestic violence from the husband, and the husband refused to give her citizenship identity and denied it to register their marriage. And he didn't allow the birth registration for children also. He left her and married another woman, and he ran away to India, and he's still living in India. So the woman is struggling so much to have the legal identity for herself. She didn't complain to the police for fear of revenge. She has no legal ties with the family. She doesn't have any rights to the family inheritance. So today, she and her 3 children are in a very vulnerable condition. Her first girl dropped out of school in 8th grade, which was last year, because she lacked a birth certificate and she couldn't continue her school. And other 2 children are going to primary school, but after a few years, and they are going to face the same fate as a big sister did. So they will also face those problems, and this is not only the story, and this is the fact that many child marriages has the same consequences after this. And those children are not receiving any social welfare and any government support since they don't have any legal identity. And even the mother, she doesn't have citizenship cards, she doesn't have bank account, she cannot apply for loans. And she literally is like a second-class citizen in her own country. So this is the impact, how child marriage can have the consequences in girls' life. So the legal framework is in place to manage child marriage and register marriage and birth to young parents. In practice, families do not comply with the rules and usually with a penalty. The legal framework must be accompanied by change at all levels. Community, partnership that seek to challenge inequitable social and gender norms are critical to break the cycle of harmful practices like child marriage. This helps promote change in people's behavior, self-realization, and self-awareness to say no to child marriage. Civil registration increases transparency around these harmful practices and protests the rights of women within a marital union. And I am so pleased that this conversation is actually happening today. And universal birth and marriage registration are important tools in the fight to end child marriage and promote gender equality. For women and girls' marriage, registration and the legal identity that comes with it is a stepping stone to empowerment, agency, and freedom of movement. All women and girls everywhere deserve this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachana, for those powerful words. And also for sticking with us through technical challenges to ensure that we were able to hear them. We really appreciate your tenacity there, both in being with us today and in the work that you have been doing. Thank you so much. I'm not the only one to express some thanks. There's thanks for you in the Q&A as well. If you're just joining us, I'll remind you we have a Q&A box where you can feel free to put questions as they come to you, and our panelists will respond in real time and in the box as they're able. If we have some time, we'll engage in a verbal Q&A at the end. Also, if you're just joining us, there's an interpretation button on the bottom right hand of your screen so that you can toggle between hearing the presentation in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. With all of those important words in mind from Rachana Sunar, we now move to a different perspective on grounded practice from Dr. Cyril Goubeji, who is the gestionnaire mandataire of the National Agency for the Identification of Persons, or the ANIP in its French acronym, in Benin. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us today.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. C'est un réel plaisir pour moi de participer à ce panel de haut niveau sur le mécanisme universel d'enrichissement des faits d'état civil et dans une approche genre. Je voudrais avant tout encore remercier le bureau UNFPA et Benin qui m'a associé à cet événement de portée internationale. Mesdames et messieurs, les réformes institutionnelles sont des facteurs non négligeables des changements de comportement des individus. Et l'avènement en 2019 au Bénin d'une agence nationale d'identification des personnes va nous aider à illustrer cette affirmation. Nous voudrions essentiellement montrer comment les réformes en matière d'identification des personnes et de l'état civil ont aidé à favoriser la prise en compte de l'approche genre dans l'enregistrement des faits d'état civil. Et nous allons partager avec vous quelques trames de défis à relever par l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes et puis ouvrir quelques perspectives. Alors, de l'identification des personnes et état civil au Bénin, il faut retenir que le Bénin a passé de longues décennies de gestion, je vais dire, difficultueuse de son état civil, avec comme à la clé les problèmes d'enregistrement des faits d'état civil, de conservation des registres et de la non-déclaration des faits d'état civil, et j'en passe. Mais aujourd'hui, le Bénin se positionne au plan international à travers les réformes majeures de l'identification des personnes et de l'état civil. Quelques innovations fortes sont à signaler. L'une des étapes de la mise en place du système d'identification des personnes au Bénin a été le recensement administratif à vocation d'identification de la population. C'était une très vaste opération opérée en 2017 et 2018 sur 6 mois et qui a permis de mettre dans une base de données environ 10 354 000 personnes, soit 93% de la population. Et figurez-vous, parmi ces millions de personnes mises en base, il y a une multitude qui n'avaient aucun acte d'état civil. Ils étaient des sans-papiers dans leur propre pays et étaient en réalité en difficulté par rapport à la question de l'accès aux services sociaux de base. Le rabais payant a permis de constituer une robuste base de données. Il faut décider de son exploitation pour le bonheur des populations, c'est-à-dire mettre cette base de données au service du développement. Le premier pas qui va suivre ce recensement, c'est la mise en place d'une loi, la loi portant identification des personnes physiques en République du Bénin, qui a institué le registre national des personnes physiques. Elle prévoit qu'il est attribué à chaque personne y inscrite un numéro personnel d'identification. Et cette disposition de la loi va opérer une révolution en matière de l'enregistrement des faits d'état civil, car le législateur suite à la loi sur l'identification des personnes et suite au rapport que l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes a déposé au gouvernement, a adopté une autre loi, la loi portant simplification de la gestion dématérialisée de l'enregistrement des faits d'état civil. Quand on regarde bien, avec cette loi, la responsabilité de déclaration des faits d'état civil incombe désormais aux services publics et aux autorités locales. À ce niveau, on peut signaler que dans l'ancien système, c'était les individus, les parents qui devaient se déplacer pour aller faire des déclarations. Or, ils étaient en but à des difficultés de survie, des difficultés économiques, des pesanteurs socio-culturels qui les empêchaient de faire les déclarations en vue de l'enregistrement des faits d'état civil. Notre réforme a opéré un renversement du plateau en mettant à la charge du service public l'obligation de déclaration. Cela signifie que c'est seulement une démarche de formalisation qui est attendue des individus. Nous allons illustrer cela en matière des mariages. Par exemple, pour l'enregistrement des mariages, il est exigé que l'homme et la femme puissent prouver leur identité de base par leur numéro personnel d'identification, et cela se fait dans les formulaires à renseigner. Après, la femme n'aura plus aucune difficulté à rentrer en possession de son acte parce qu'une fois l'acte enregistré par le service public qui est dirigé par l'officier de l'état civil, plus rien ne peut donc l'empêcher d'obtenir son acte. Il y a également à retenir que le mariage n'est reconnu que s'il est célébré devant l'officier de l'état civil. Et cette exigence de la loi garantit les droits des époux sans discrimination, ce qui corrige l'ancien système où c'était la famille qui était au cœur donc, de l'accès au mariage avec les pesanteurs et les blocages que l'on rencontrait. L'identification et l'état civil tel qu'opéré par l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes est sensible au genre et on peut le démontrer avec quelques arguments. Premièrement, il y a des mécanismes d'inclusion des femmes et des filles à l'acquisition d'une identité nationale. Au fait, en raison de ce que les femmes sont exposées à la vulnérabilité économique dans certains milieux, le risque qu'elles ne puissent accéder à une identité nationale formelle est grand. L'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes a mis en œuvre un document officiel appelé certificat d'identification personnelle qui permet à tout détenteur d'avoir accès aux services que procure la carte nationale d'identité. Cela a facilité la tâche aux femmes et on constate que les premiers usagers de l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes, c'est les femmes qui sont dans des groupements de femmes qui ont besoin de microcrédits et qui ont besoin d'appui de la part de certaines ONG et autres qui viennent nombreuses et dans les unités déconcentrées de l'année pour demander ce papier qui, en réalité, a la même valeur que la carte nationale d'identité. Et figurez-vous, le coût du certificat d'identification personnelle est de 25% moins que le coût de la carte nationale d'identité. Et mieux, l'ANIP a signé un accord de projet avec la Banque mondiale à travers le projet WORI pour la délivrance du certificat du numéro personnel d'identification gratuitement à toute personne dans le cadre de l'accès aux services sociaux de base. Un autre argument qui montre que les réformes en cours dans le cadre de l'ANIP sont sensibles aux genre, c'est la connexion avec les communautés pour assurer l'inclusion des femmes et des filles dans la déclaration et l'enregistrement à la naissance et au mariage. En effet, les nouvelles lois mises en place en faveur de la réforme ont établi que les communautés témoins de faits sont admis comme des vecteurs d'information et ont un statut, le statut d'aide à la décision d'enregistrement des faits d'état civil. Ainsi, dès lors que la communauté a connaissance de la survenance d'un fait d'état civil, il lui est loisible de porter l'information à la connaissance de l'autorité locale qui devient titulaire de la déclaration à l'état civil. Ce faisant, les femmes et les filles qui, dans un passé récent, étaient exclues, deviennent des bénéficiaires de ce témoignage communautaire. On peut également signaler que cette identification sensible aux genre ne cesse pas de soulever quelques problèmes, quelques difficultés. C'est les défis maintenant. Les défis, nous pouvons en parler en deux grands points. Défi de la mobilisation sociale en faveur de l'enregistrement de tous les faits d'état civil et la question du retrait des actes pour ne laisser personne de côté. À ce niveau, le nouveau mécanisme mis en place par l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes a changé le paradigme classique qui faisait du retrait de l'acte d'état civil un indicateur de résultat. Désormais, la mobilisation et le plaidoyer se fait sur la disponibilité permanente de l'état civil sans que le non-retrait de l'acte ne compromette les droits de la personne. Ainsi, à tout moment, lorsque le besoin d'utiliser l'acte se fait sentir, la seule inscription au registre national des personnes physiques suffit à établir l'acte et à le délivrer. Il n'y a donc plus de registre papier du fait d'état civil à conserver et à gérer par l'officier de l'état civil. Est rentré dans le monde du numérique. Je rappelle utilement que le mécanisme universel demande aux États de faire la promotion des technologies nouvelles pour faciliter l'enregistrement des faits d'état civil, et c'est ce que l'ANIP a fait à ce niveau. Deuxième registre de défi, c'est la mobilisation de ressources complémentaires pour la vulgarisation de la nouvelle loi sur l'état civil sur toute l'étendue du territoire national. Une chose est d'avoir une loi qui devient un outil d'intervention du service public, mais une autre est de divulguer la loi au sein de la communauté, au sein de la population pour susciter le changement de comportement. Les nouveaux tests juridiques sur l'identification des personnes et l'état civil engendrent des comportements nouveaux dans le service public. Et il y a donc nécessité aussi de communiquer, de sensibiliser, de former pour que ces innovations rentrent dans les mœurs de l'administration. Mais de l'autre côté, il faut aussi penser à pénétrer les populations pour que leur comportement, leur culture puissent changer pour accompagner la révolution créée au niveau de l'Agence nationale d'identification des personnes. En clair, l'ANIP a besoin d'être soutenue pour atteindre les objectifs d'une identification efficace et inclusive des personnes. Mesdames et messieurs,
je m'excuse, c'est nécessaire pour nous de continuer avec Irina Dinkou. Pardonnez-moi, mais merci beaucoup pour...
je voudrais juste vous remercier de toute votre attention. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Just thanking Dr. Gubaji there for this copious information. And, oh, pardon me, my translation assistance is still on in the background there. And there's so much more we could hear and learn from him and from the example in Benin, clearly. So thank you so much for being with us today. We're moving on now to Irina Dinkou, who is the Senior Technical Advisor with the Center for Excellence for CRVS Systems with UNFPA, and who equally has a lot of very important lessons learned and reflections to share with us. So Irina, thank you for hanging in there. We're so glad you're here. Oh, Irina, sorry, you're muted. There you are. Thank you.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Gina, en fait, de me donner la parole. Je pense que c'est toujours difficile de venir en dernier parce que les choses les plus intéressantes se sont dites. Mais peut-être le défi est aussi de mettre les conclusions, en effet, de ce beau webinaire qui a été organisé par mes collègues. Alors, ce que je voudrais dire, c'est nous avons parlé de l'enregistrement des mariages pendant l'heure qui s'est écoulée, mais la question centrale, je pense, c'est qu'est-ce que c'est que l'enregistrement des mariages et en fait, qu'est-ce que c'est que le mariage, comment on définit le mariage civil en tant que tel, n'est-ce pas? En fait, le droit de se marier, il est vraiment bien donné dans certaines conventions internationales à partir évidemment de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme jusqu'aux conventions et instruments juridiques les plus récents. Mais il n'y a nulle part une définition du mariage. Qu'est-ce que c'est une définition onusienne sur laquelle les États membres sont tombés d'accord, n'est-ce pas? Alors peut-être pourquoi? Parce qu'en effet, le mariage en tant que tel, c'est une coutume et il est aussi réglé par les lois nationales, ce qui fait du mariage en effet une partie de l'état civil difficile à définir et sur laquelle il est difficile de se mettre d'accord en tant qu'expert. Peut-être qu'on devrait revenir un peu à la définition des principes et recommandations de nos collègues de l'United Nations Statistics Division qui disent que le mariage, en effet, c'est un acte, c'est une cérémonie, c'est un processus par lequel les époux, pas seulement l'homme et la femme, mais les époux en général, forment une relation juridique, mettent les bases d'une union à travers une relation juridique et que la légalité d'une telle union peut être établie de manière civile, religieuse ou autre, telle que définie dans les lois nationales, n'est-ce pas? Donc, s'il fallait retenir quelque chose, c'est que le droit de se marier, il est fondamental, il est défini dans certains instruments, mais on ne définit pas le mariage, bien que le mariage à l'état civil, ainsi que la documentation qui s'ensuit, peut protéger les époux, en particulier les époux les plus vulnérables, à travers le cycle de vie, c'est-à-dire et même au-delà, si on passe aux générations ultérieures, puisque souvent, l'enregistrement de la naissance des enfants issus du mariage est conditionné à l'enregistrement et à la présence du certificat de mariage des parents. Mais les présentations que j'ai suivies aujourd'hui me ramènent à la question centrale, en effet, de ces webinaires et des conclusions et de messages qu'on voudrait peut-être faire parvenir à nos participants. Il est important qu'on revienne à la recherche. Pourquoi? Il est fondamental, en effet, les présentations d'aujourd'hui disent, de comprendre dans les gouvernements que les partenaires, qui sont les personnes non enregistrées? Où est-ce qu'ils sont? Pourquoi ils ne s'enregistrent pas? De quel groupe ethnique ils font partie? Quelle est la classe socio-économique à laquelle ils appartiennent? Pour pouvoir contribuer de manière durable au développement et à la mise en place de stratégies nationales de l'état civil qui permettrait l'augmentation de la complétude et de la couverture de l'enregistrement de mariage à l'horizon 2030 et bien sûr contribuer à l'égalité de genre et à atteindre les objectifs du millénaire. Et je pense que c'est seulement quand on aurait vraiment contribué à répondre à ces questions et qu'on aurait contribué également à développer un système d'état civil qui est centré sur l'être humain, à mettre en place des politiques, de la législation et un environnement vraiment qui est conducif à faire venir les gens vers l'état civil pour enregistrer les faits d'état civil comme le mariage, n'est-ce pas? Puisque le mariage requiert un consensus mutuel des époux, d'autres choses qui sont très différentes de l'enregistrement, n'est-ce pas, des naissances et des décès. Et aussi, ce qui est central, il me semble, des présentations de Dorina, de Romesh, de Dr Cyril, ce qui en ressort pour moi, le message, c'est que la réponse est dans nos communautés et dans le partenariat de recherche, de mise en œuvre et de retour vers les communautés dans lesquelles on vit et pour lesquelles on travaille. Bien sûr, main dans la main avec le gouvernement pour augmenter la couverture de l'enregistrement des mariages et aussi que le document se trouve avec les époux à la maison. Je voudrais dire que j'ai eu vraiment un plaisir à écouter mes collègues puisque le domaine de recherche socio-anthropologique autour du mariage est très, très... Enfin, il n'a pas été vraiment puisé, on n'a pas vraiment fait attention à tous les détails, on est en tout début, donc il y a beaucoup de place pour l'innovation. Et il est important pour que les gouvernements et les partenaires se mettent ensemble afin que vraiment, à travers le mariage, les femmes en particulier, mais aussi les époux les plus vulnérables soient protégés, qu'on acquiert l'égalité des genres et qu'on finisse des pratiques néfastes telles que le mariage des enfants, par exemple, et autres à laquelle ce fait d'état civil peut contribuer. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Irina. That was an incredibly helpful level of detail and also perspective there on the situation that we're dealing with. And we appreciate it so much. We're approaching noon and the end of the formal remarks in our panel. We're going to remain available for some live Q&A for those who can stay around. But just before we do that, ahead of perhaps losing you to some of you to other events that are in the works during this really rich UN Behavioral Sciences Week, I wanted to make sure that we didn't go anywhere without thanking the UN Innovation Network, who oversaw the organization of this week this year, and who's created this dynamic space for UNFPA and for other UN entities to share how behavioral science is being used across the entire UN system. So thanks so much to the UN Innovation Network. And we want to acknowledge and thank the UNFPA units that have organized this event in particular on how behavioral sciences promotes gender equality through strengthened marriage registration. Of course, the UNFPA's own innovation unit in the Office of the Executive Director, the Center for Excellence for CRVS Systems, the Population and Development Branch, and the Gender and Human Rights Branch of UNFPA's Technical Division. In addition, of course, to our wonderful panelists, who we'll thank again by name before we close out here today, but much appreciation and acknowledgement to those institutions. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A if folks are able to stick around, and thank you to the panelists who have also been able to spend a little extra time with us. And we're taking questions in the Q&A box and can respond to them live. And I'm also taking questions on WhatsApp here from my team. So let me see. I think one of those we wanted to be sure to get to, I think we have been able to reach already in our comments. And pardon me, my tech is acting up here. I know we had a question for Dr. Cyril that I am trying to find here. Okay, let us start for the moment with a question that's come in for Ramesh or for Irina. And Ramesh, Irina, I leave it to you who would like to answer this question. But we have heard, and you have certainly made more explicit for us, that the digitization of these CRVS systems is gaining a lot of attention and a lot more conversation. Are you able to give us a little bit of an update on how behavioral sciences are being used to guide that digitization, in particular, the modernization of these systems?
Thanks, Gina. Maybe I'll take an initial stab, and Irina can complement and build further. Yeah, I think Dr. Cyril really, helped identify some of the main issues here. We've seen particularly, in work UNFPA has been doing jointly in Burkina Faso and in other parts of Western Central Africa, that there's a huge push for innovative handheld technologies and digitization efforts of government data systems like civil registration and legal ID systems. One of the big challenges here is to focus on the tech and the digital and potentially digitize systems which haven't been adjusted to be people-centric and gender transformative. And so the key thing here is for the technology innovation work to be coupled with behavioral science. And so I think today's webinar is a strong reminder to us that behavioral science is a tool which needs to be integrated into some of the modernization efforts around civil registration and legal identity. And these need to work very, very closely hand in hand. We're at the very early stages of this with partners in Benin and Burkina Faso. So I think we'll be reporting back in coming months on how that's going. But I think this is what I'd like to really emphasize, is that these kinds of behavioral science research initiatives are really revolutionizing the way we understand how to intervene and build better systems. I think in the past, we've seen what we'd call very supply side-centered interventions, which look at, how do we build more civil registration centers, or how do we develop better technology solutions, and not really, and that's been done almost devoid of partnership with local community groups and religious institutions, and identifying some of the special needs and issues that women and girls face in particular. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ramesh. Irina, would you like to contribute as well?
Just a few words, because I think Ramesh is such a compelling speaker, so very difficult to come behind. But I wanted to say that digitization is not really all the time like the silver bullet, which is going to solve every question everywhere. And then, unfortunately, over the last 25 years or 30 years, I mean, since late 90s, that we are working on improving coverage on, in particular, around birth registration, and it's now moving on marriage registration and death registration. All the interventions, or the majority, 99%, are focused on the supply side. And I think that partners and governments, they are operating under the assumption that if you have the technology, you sort it out. You give the phone, and surprise, I mean, information, as Dorina was mentioning, doesn't change behavior. And this doesn't mean that you will be able to convince the citizen in, the remote Central African Republic to come to walk 45 kilometers to register a marriage or a death if he doesn't find, the utility, and if he doesn't understand. And so I think that there is really a huge space. It is really a barren field on which we can operate, but it is something very necessary, both to do research, to contribute to human-centered design, I believe, implement social and behavior change intervention, which have the capacity to really contribute, bringing people to the services, and don't put everything on the people. Bring the services to the people as well, because sometimes it is easier as well. And another thing, I think we should really stop this presumption that we know why people don't not come to register. The truth of the matter is that we don't know why. We don't know why they're not coming. We are presuming. We think that we know. And I think that the research that we are unveiling, and some of the research the Center of Excellence published, is going to be really groundbreaking into the next couple of months. And is going to reveal things about which the community as a whole didn't think, and it's, I believe that we do have really this duty towards the community to move forward and apply behavioral sciences, as well, taking lead from what the UN Secretary General said about the importance of social and behavior change to every field, including change within the UN and with the partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irina. I'm reminded of there's a dynamism between the point that you've made and some of the points that Dr. Gubeji was speaking of from his slides as well, from the perspective of Benin. And the question that's come in for us for Dr. Gubeji is, in some sense, a little simple, but really gets at what you were saying there, Irina, as well. How do you think, Dr. Gubeji, the government can or should be working better with communities to increase marriage registration rates? Where do you see interventions that can lead to real positive outcome?
Merci pour améliorer le taux d'enregistrement des mariages. Avec toutes les réformes qui sont en cours, nous avons estimé que le service public devra être orienté vers la prise en compte des préoccupations des communautés. En réalité, les communautés vivent dans leur culture et regardent la loi comme un mécanisme qui les supplante. Et dès lors que le mécanisme qui les supplante apparaît comme un mécanisme qui étouffe, les populations tournent dos à la loi et vivent dans leur culture. Elles ne se soucient plus des inconvénients du non-respect de la loi parce que la loi ne fait plus partie de leur vie. C'est plutôt leur culture qui fait partie de leur vie. C'est ce qui conduit souvent à dire que nos lois ne sont pas effectives. Nos lois sont là comme lettres mortes parce que régissant un système dont les acteurs principaux ne se sentent pas concernés. Nous avons donc retenu par rapport à la question de la modernisation des processus que les deux pans de la numérisation, qu'il convient ici de rappeler, la numérisation des processus qui est la numérisation de la matière et la numérisation des identités qui est l'inscription numérique, doivent être tous deux orientés vers les besoins réels des communautés. Ce que nous avons commencé par avoir du côté du Bénin, c'est par exemple la création des services de satisfaction des besoins basiques des communautés et amener les communautés à s'approprier l'utilisation de la nouvelle technologie, des nouvelles technologies pour accéder à ces services. Étant entendu qu'il s'agit de services nécessaires, à la limite de services vitaux, les populations se sentent obligées de changer leur comportement pour s'approprier la technologie. Exemple, la mise en place de la finance digitale au profit des personnes pauvres et plus précisément des femmes. À ce niveau, on se demandait si dans le monde rural, les femmes pourraient véritablement accéder à la finance digitale. Mais quand nous avons fait l'expérience basée sur l'identité numérique, c'est-à-dire l'obligation d'être enregistré pour avoir son identifiant unique, on a constaté que les femmes se sont procurées les portables, les téléphones portables. Les femmes ont commencé véritablement par intervenir dans la finance digitale et les résultats sont magiques. C'est de la même manière que pour l'enregistrement des mariages, on a vulgarisé le processus par lequel les futurs époux peuvent accéder au mariage. Et à ce niveau, nous avons rencontré une difficulté. La difficulté, c'est que le mariage tel que conçu par la loi conduit à un comportement de fête, de festin, et donc engendre des dépenses. Mais en milieu rural, bon nombre de personnes n'ont pas les moyens d'organiser la fête. Du coup, ils se disent que le mariage est une question de moyens et donc il ne faut pas aller s'enregistrer même si on a le désir de se marier. Nous avons donc trouvé à ce niveau qu'on devra communiquer, sensibiliser et en réalité changer le modèle pour faire comprendre aux communautés que le mariage n'est pas une question de moyens financiers, le mariage est simplement une question de démarche pour conforter le désir que l'on a de vivre désormais ensemble. C'est ce que nous voyons du côté du enregistrement des mariages, parce qu'aujourd'hui, les jeunes ont peur de s'engager dans le mariage. Les jeunes filles ont peur de s'engager dans le mariage, mais les jeunes garçons aussi ont peur de s'engager dans le mariage parce qu'ils se disent, n'ayant pas de moyens financiers, ils ne peuvent pas inviter des gens pour dire qu'ils sont en train de faire célébrer le mariage. C'est-à-dire le mot célébrer que l'on retrouve d'abord à la base du mariage est un mot qui repousse les gens aujourd'hui. Nous devons démonter ce paradigme pour faire du mariage, l'enregistrement du mariage, une simple formalité de la vie. Quand on aura réussi à le faire, je pense qu'on pourra désormais rester tranquille parce que les gens auront intérêt à enregistrer leur mariage. De l'autre côté, nous avons la multitude qui est aujourd'hui bloquée parce que vivant ensemble, on va parler de concubinage, on va parler d'union libre, alors que dans leur tête, ils sont déjà mariés. Et la loi dit qu'ils ne sont pas mariés. Il va falloir créer une réforme à ce niveau, une opération pour inviter ceux qui vivent déjà ensemble et qui, dans leur intention, dans leur conscience, se sentent comme des mariés à passer devant l'officier de l'état civil pour régulariser leur situation. Si nous réussissons ces deux défis, nous pensons que le mariage pourra rentrer dans les mœurs, le mariage tel que conçu dans nos lois pourra rentrer dans les mœurs.
Merci beaucoup encore. We could keep having this conversation for hours and probably days. I think Irina wanted to chime in with one point catalyzed by what you have just said, Dr. Gubaji, and then we will close the session.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to say that in general, communities and societies, they know everything about the vital events, right? About how people are born, everything around birth and marriages and death and why people die and why they married and why they divorce. But we collectively have failed to transfer the orality of our societies and communities into the written form, which is the civil register, which I'd like to call the book of life, because really it translates what the communities know into the written form in order to protect the individual from birth to death, through marriage and divorce and adoption and all the vital events that are mentioned into the national legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Irina. I love that metaphor, the book of life. That's what we're all trying to detail a bit better and more deeply here together around the world. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much to our panelists, Ruchana Sunar, Irina Andreev-Gitaru, Romesh Silva, Dr. Cyril Gubadji, and of course, Irina Dinko. Thank you, UNFPA, for all the organizational effort, and UN Innovation Week for this wonderful week on behavioral sciences. Have a beautiful day.
Je